So I'd like to welcome everybody for this evening's roundtable discussion on the Humanities and the Modern Language Association today. Before we get started, I need to thank the various co-organizers and sponsors of tonight's event. So I'd like particularly to thank the Maison Francaise, the Modern Language Association, the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, the Heyman Center for the Humanities, the Department of French, the Department of English, and the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society. Special thanks to Lindsay Long, our wonderful program coordinator here at the Maison Francaise, and to the Maison Francaise director, Shani Pierre. Shani, unfortunately, could not be with us tonight, but she has played a big part in organizing this event and all of the events that we have on the program this year. This year is the centennial of the Maison Francaise. We have many interesting events. If you haven't checked out the exhibit that's in the lobby with interesting photographs and films for the 100th anniversary, I would encourage you to do that. Also to join our email list. So it's really a privilege to be able to discuss the issues before us with this distinguished panel of speakers who are all, in addition to their scholarly careers, in one sense or another on the front lines of the humanities, I would say. So I'm going to make very brief introductions just in the interest of time, but they all merit a much longer presentation that would take into account their extensive scholarship. So let me start with Marianne Hirsch, who is the 2013 president of the Modern Language Association and also a former editor of PMLA, the Proceedings of the Modern Language Association, one of the principal publications of the MLA. Marianne Hirsch is the William Peterfield Trent Professor of English and Comparative Literature at Columbia University, also professor of Women's and Gender Studies. She is a widely published and influential contributor to the field of memory studies, known for her work on the politics and poetics of memory, and particularly the transgenerational dimensions of memory, especially with regard to trauma and the Holocaust. Mary Louise Pratt is a past president of the MLA. She's also Silva President of Spanish and Portuguese at New York University. Mary Louise Pratt is a leading specialist of Latin American studies, working at the intersection of literature, anthropology, linguistics, known in particular for her work on the processes of transculturation. Mary Louise has flown in a lot further than Washington Square tonight because she came from Albuquerque, so thank you very much for coming so far to be with us for this discussion. Carlos Alonso is Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences at Columbia University and also currently a member of the MLA Task Force on Graduate Education. He is also a past editor of PMLA, and before he became Dean of the Graduate School was chair of the Department of Latin American and Iberian Studies. Carlos Alonso is a specialist of 19th and 20th century Latin American intellectual history and cultural production, and a specialist of literary and cultural theory. He's also been very much involved with the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society at Columbia. And Pierre Force is Dean for Humanities at Columbia University and a professor of French and of history. He is a widely published specialist of 17th and 18th century French and British literature and intellectual history. And we were also hoping to have with us this evening Simon Gikandi from the English department at Princeton University, who is the current editor of PMLA. Unfortunately, Simon could not be here due to a medical emergency in his family. We hope everything is going to go well and smoothly with that, and we will miss him in this discussion. And I feel that in addition to, however, the distinguished panel that we have here, I want to acknowledge that there are many people in the audience, many people here who have a lot to say on these topics, so we look forward to hearing you as well this evening. So just to give a little background for this conversation, a few months ago, I think, Mariana and I talked about having an event during her presidency of the MLA to talk about some of the current challenges facing the association and some of the initiatives that she has been spearheading. And we agreed that it would make sense to broaden that conversation to encompass the humanities more widely. And then I guess over the summer, the potential relevancy of this kind of conversation became ever more apparent with the publication and circulation of a number of major reports on the status of the humanities in the United States, and particularly in American education and higher education. So several reports were issued. They generated a certain amount of press. There were articles in the New York Times, the Chronicle of Higher Education, of course, the Huffington Post. I don't want to dwell on them too much, but I'll just mention two of the major reports. The first by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which in response to a request by a bipartisan group of members of the House and the Senate, established a Humanities Commission to report on the state of the humanities. And I suppose this came out of a sense that a certain amount of attention had been paid to the STEM field, so science, technology, computers, engineering, and that the same had not been done for the humanities. So they issued a report. And there was also a cluster of reports coming out of Harvard University under the auspices of the Humanities Initiative, I think it's called, the Humanities Project, a collective of 40 faculty members in the humanities. So these reports don't speak the same language. They use different kinds of kind of idiom to speak about the challenges and the directions that humanities should take. The American Academy of Arts and Sciences report emphasizes civic leadership, cultural diplomacy, American competitiveness, national security, whereas the Harvard report speaks a little bit more about interdisciplinarity, democratic access, and global citizenship. However, in spite of those differences, linguistic and philosophical differences, there are some common threads, and so I thought that was where we might begin this evening. And just in terms of format, we discussed a few very basic central questions that I'm going to throw out and ask the panelists to approach on their own terms, and then afterwards we'll invite questions and comments, remarks from everyone else. So both of the sets of reports paint, if not a bleak picture of the state of the humanities today, at least an anxious picture of falling enrollments at the university level, and they suggest that these falling enrollments are due to a failure on the part of scholars in the humanities to speak to attract interest from undergraduates. In the AAAS report, this is linked to a wider decline of the role of the humanities in American public life. In the humanities report card that was issued, it is pointed out that reading for pleasure has declined 11%. I don't know quite how you measure decline in reading for pleasure, but 11% since 1992. So, in light of these claims and figures, is there a crisis in the humanities? Are there falling enrollments? The language of crisis is sometimes used for ideological purposes to critique politicization of the field or questions such as theory, jargon. Is there a problem? Where is the problem? How should we respond to these reports? So maybe, Marianne, you'd like to kick things off by...
Let me just thank Madeleine for organizing this. And I do want to say that a number of colleagues from MLA are here today and might be able to help answer these questions, and also other very distinguished guests. And I'm so happy to see you all. Is there a crisis? Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I don't find the language of crisis in any way helpful. I think that it is a way that we talk about social and political problems in this country, and I think it's a way to occlude a lot of those problems by moving us from crisis to crisis and never resolving anything. I'm not sure that there was ever a period in recent memory when the humanities were stable, well-funded, well-attended, and did not, were not called into question in some way or other, probably for ideological purposes, as you say. So I'd like us to think about what some of these reports might have found and how they were framed, how the questions were framed, rather than talking about crisis. The other thing I wanted to say is something that Madeleine mentioned, which is the framing of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences report around questions of competition and national security. And that is the context in which they assess the situation and make their recommendations. And I would like to propose a very different context in which to look at the state of the humanities today. And that context has to do with problems in higher education that have to do with cost of university education, with student debt, and with reach and possibility for a great number of students to attend our universities and our classes, and also with the job market on all levels. I think that would be the context in which I want to have this discussion, and not necessarily national security. I think if we shift that frame, maybe we could have a meaningful discussion, not just about the humanities, but also about the curriculum in more general terms. So there's another problem I have with even the mission of these reports, which is to isolate the humanities from the social sciences and the STEM fields. I just don't see what that serves. And so if we start counting enrollments and we start counting majors, if we could get 2% more majors in English, and we can take them from sociology, then we've won something. It's a zero-sum game, and I just don't see how that's actually helpful. And I've been trying to think about the work that we actually do in our departments and in our curriculum, and there is so much work that's interdisciplinary and that actually cuts across these divisions of humanities, social sciences, and STEM fields. And I would like to focus on, I would like us to focus on what those conversations across these fields can bring us, rather than isolating the humanities fields. So in my own work on memory studies, for example, I come at it from literature and visual arts and notions of social justice. But I have so much to learn when thinking about collective memory. I have so much to learn from sociologists who want to teach me about how collectivities are formed. I have a lot to learn from psychologists who talk about individual memory. I have so much to learn from brain sciences that image the brain and teach me how memory works. And this is how, what I'd like our students in the future to be doing, rather than counting enrollments and numbers. There's also been a lot of writing, and David Lawrence, who's in the audience, who's director of research at MLA, has dispelled some of the numbers, the drops in majors and enrollments, the crisis that's been named in the press, and the supposed drop to 17% humanities majors in recent years is actually a drop that happened around 1980, and as things have remained fairly steady since the early 80s. So I'm not sure actually what purpose some of this distortion in numbers serves right now, but if it is to call attention to literacy, language learning, and some of the positive things that the reports have to say, innovative thinking, imagination, then maybe it's for a good cause. But I don't think it's been framed in a useful way so far. Okay. And maybe, Pierre, you want to talk about Columbia?
I have become something of a professional cheerleader for the humanities, because so I'll do a bit of cheerleading, and for the humanities, also a little bit for Columbia. But so Marion, you talked about statistics and how they may not be that helpful. But I was asked to come up with numbers, so I will give you the numbers I found. So I can tell you some very precise numbers for Columbia. So humanities, social science, and natural science majors, 15 years ago and now. And I have the numbers for Harvard as well. They are in the report. So if you think in terms of majors and the proportion of humanities majors as overall, as a proportion of overall majors at Columbia, back in 15 years ago, 33% of Columbia undergraduates majored in the humanities. Today it's 27%, so there has been a small decline in market share, as if you want to speak in these terms. Social science, 15 years ago, 44% of Columbia students majored in the social sciences. Now it's 42%. And science, 15 years ago, 22% of Columbia students majored in the sciences. Now it's 31%. So that's majors. If you count enrollments, it tells a slightly different story. 15 years ago, 42% of all enrollments in Columbia College, 42% were in the humanities. Now it is 33%. 15 years ago, 27% of all enrollments were in the social sciences. Now it is 25%. And 15 years ago, 30% of undergraduate enrollments were in the natural sciences. Now it is 41%. So what happened actually is a very, very large increase in natural science enrollments, a spectacular increase. And actually the faculty conversation at Columbia 20 years ago was about the need to build the sciences, and you know, we've actually achieved that goal. The numbers at actually the numbers at Harvard tell you the same story. 15 years ago, 28% of Harvard students were enrolled in science courses. Now it is 40%, same very large increase. Humanities enrollments went down from 26 to 24%. The number of humanities majors at Harvard is indeed down to 17%. At Columbia, it's 27%. So there are more students majoring in the humanities here. I guess one more number or two more numbers. The number of would-be humanists at Harvard, that is the entering class at Harvard, is 18%. The number of would-be humanists at Columbia for the entering class at Columbia is 26%. So what do you make of that? Or what do I make of that? So in the past 15 years there has been a decline, but it was from a very high base. Historically, the humanities had been dominant at Columbia. The distribution is now more balanced. And so the untold story is of a huge increase in science enrollments, and it is the same story at Harvard. So I can only speculate as to the reasons for the relative strengths of the humanities here. One interesting feature at Columbia is at Harvard, the general education enrollments in general education courses collapsed. They declined by 50% over 10 years. At Columbia, there is still a core curriculum that hasn't changed, in a very long time, and the core curriculum at Columbia is essentially a humanistic operation. It's humanities and history, so it's lit-hums, literature humanities, contemporary civilization, art humanities, music humanities, the language requirement, and the science requirement. So it's almost entirely humanities. So the students here have to do humanities. If they choose to come here, they have, in the first 2 years, they have to do a lot of humanities. That's part of the package. So I think if you think about doing humanities or sciences or social sciences, I would generalize this and this remark and say that the core of a liberal arts education is and should be humanistic. And even if the vast majority of students end up majoring in sciences, it would be essential to keep a humanistic core. And why is that? I would argue that it is because the humanities are intimately connected with teaching in a way that the sciences are not. You could imagine scientists spending all their time in a lab and not teaching. It is hard to imagine a humanist who would not be teaching at all. Now, there is a long tradition behind this way of thinking, and you could go back to the concept of Bildung. The Harvard document that talks about the humanities talks about Renaissance humanism and Lorenzo Valla, and then it jumps to University College London in 1826. If you think of historical references, one that is more relevant is the birth of the modern university in the early 19th century Germany. Herder's idea of cultivating the human, Bildung zum Menschen. Bildung was the key concept of post-Enlightenment humanism as it was developed in Germany, and it meant something like self-formation, cultivation, education, and there's a text by Hegel on theoretical Bildung, where Bildung is described as a process of coming into one's own through self-alienation, and the way you do self-alienation is by learning Latin and Greek and all those difficult languages, I think that model can be generalized, and this is what we do in the humanities. We learn languages, we learn foreign languages, we learn foreign and past conceptual schemes. This is about recognizing one's own in the alien and becoming at home in it. And the scientific method doesn't do this for this. So I disagree on this point with Marianne. I think there are real differences between and interdisciplinary work is of course extremely useful, but the sciences and the humanities have profoundly different ways of engaging question. The scientific method, keeps the object at a distance and forbids you to make it your own. It doesn't change you. And my sense, that deep down, is that if there is a malaise in the humanities today, it is the continuation of an inferiority complex, that has plagued the humanities since the beginning of the modern university. With the triumph of the sciences, the humanities thought they had to conceive of themselves as an extension of the natural sciences, using scientific methods. This is still very strong in countries like France, in which you don't even say scholarly, you say scientific. Mm-hmm. When you do humanities, when you do literature for a living, you say you are doing scientific work on literature. Mm-hmm. But I would argue that this is still internalized by many humanists, even when it takes the form of a violent rejection of the claims of science. And Roland Barthes was dreaming of a science of the particular, which seemed to him the ultimate gesture of postmodern transgression. But there is such a thing as the science of the particular, and it is called the humanities. It is about studying this person, this group of people, this particular way of life, and understanding how they came into being. So generalizations are possible and desirable, but understanding never means subsuming a particular occurrence under a universal law. So it's about understanding what this person has to say and to remain open to the possibility that what they are saying might be true. So it is important, I think, to affirm that the humanities too deal in truth. So, and why does this matter to an undergraduate who may choose to major in the humanities? So one hears sometimes that the sciences or the social sciences are more practical and help solve real life problems, while the humanities are a luxury one indulges in for personal pleasure. So I would submit that the great strength of the humanities is that they start from the concrete conditions of human life as they make sense to the humans themselves. Now, the words, taste, common sense, judgment are key concepts and indeed technical terms of the humanist tradition. It is a core belief of humanists that these faculties can in fact be improved by a humanistic education.
Since you bring up the question of the interdisciplinary, maybe we can turn to that question. It's, as you mentioned, Marianne, in the AAS report, the humanities are placed in competition with the social sciences, and a great deal of emphasis is placed on the migration of undergraduates. They're said to be voting with their feet from the humanities to the social sciences, which, of course, depends in part on how you draw the line between what is a humanities and what is a social science subject. But the Harvard approach, on the other hand, emphasizes the need for greater interdisciplinarity, and at two levels. One is the creation of access courses that encourage undergraduates who might not otherwise discover humanistic fields to discover them. I think that the 3 courses they propose are gateway courses called the Art of Looking, the Art of Listening, the Art of Seeing, interdisciplinary courses, which seeing, looking, and listening.
Seeing and looking, it's reading.
Looking, listening, something along these lines. They also, these reports also talk about creating what they call crossroads courses that bring together disciplines in unusual, more surprising configurations than the expected ones, that in a way, rather than having an organic interdisciplinarity, have a kind of engineered interdisciplinarity built into them. So I thought maybe I would ask Mary Louise and Carlos to speak to this a little bit. Mary Louise, you've been involved in your own research and in programs at NYU in interdisciplinarity. How are you thinking now about the status of interdisciplinarity, both at a pedagogical, at a scholarship level?
I have a lot of trouble addressing these questions in this way, but with the case of, and I think that for me, just to go back to the conversation that began, I sort of feel like the frame for this really is, the bigger picture is the corporatization of the university, and that's what really is, and the humanities are quite, in many of its formations and in many respects are very inconvenient for the corporatization of the university, or need to be reshaped if they're going to be convenient to the corporatization of the university. And I think the self-alienation paradigm is very interesting, because that's one way of talking about the operation of humanistic work, which is about a lot of displacement and self-alienation, finding the world to be different than what you began thinking it was, and freshmen come into universities expecting that, and so I think with these 2 reports, in particular, the framing of the American Academy report is, if you haven't looked at it online, don't do it, spare yourself.
Yeah.
Because you click on it, and up comes, the first thing that comes up is a great big American flag. And this is the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. This is like our, erudite people. And the whole thing then gets framed like this. It says, who will lead America into a bright future? Mm-hmm. We're looking at, planetary ecocide, and the discourse is like that. And it says, we need citizens who can participate in their own government, engage in the world, and so on. And I really, and we need future leaders and so on. And this language of the language is already so self-censored in these things. There is a prohibition on negativity of any kind, which means, again, that self-alienating critical function of the humanities is not in the conversation. So the conversation is 99% over before it begins. Compare, the report says, this is a kind of language. Mutual respect, and again, just this is like nice, warm language, right? Mutual respect makes it possible for people around the world to work together to address issues such as environmental sustainability. I want you to think about this language and think about BP in the Gulf, okay? Mutual respect makes it possible for people around the world to work together to address issues such as environmental sustainability, global health challenges. Now more than ever, the spirit of international cooperation, the promotion of trade and foreign investment, the requirements of international diplomacy, etc., depend in some measure on an American citizenry trained. That's the kind of language. Now, to get a little bit of distance on that language, one of the reports quotes a 1965 document, the head of the National Atomic Energy Commission, and the way he put it was. Let me find the quotation. Where did I find this? We cannot afford, this is 1965 from the head of the Atomic Energy Commission, we cannot afford to drift physically, morally, or aesthetically in a world in which the current moves so rapidly, perhaps toward an abyss. Science and technology are providing us with the means to travel swiftly, but what course do we take? This is a question that no computer can answer. That was 1965. That sounds to me like the language we want to be looking at today, you know. So to me, that when I pick up these reports, the conversation's 99% off the table before the reports even begin, and I think that's really a place of great impatience for me. Interdisciplinarity, my feeling about that is to phrase that question, to pose it as a decision about what we think students need, or what they're going to like, or what to focus it in that way is probably pretty inauthentic. I don't think it works to think about it in terms of some construction we make about students' needs. I think interdisciplinarity, what we're calling that, comes out of our own incredible methodological revolutions that have happened in the humanities in the last 30 years that have transformed our objects of study, the approaches we do, and we've created these methods that bring into view things like gender that have to be studied from through all kinds of different discourses, and we've invented the discourses to study those, and the methods to self-alienate those discourses through deconstruction. So we've really, interdisciplinarity is just the result of, or the name for, what we've achieved. And I think that another piece of this is that I completely agree that we need to make common cause insofar as we can with science and social science in opposition to the or in response to the corporatization of the university. Harvard, by the way, was the first university in the United States to allow corporate-funded, patent-oriented research in its, so for them now to be writing this report, this has its ironies in it. But I think we could make common cause around this question of corporatization, and the vocationalization of education is just one of the symptoms of that, right? But I think that in the humanities, we at the same time, we need to claim the idea that we, like scientists, that we make discoveries and we invent things. You know, discovery is, in science, is that there's something there and you find it. Somebody finds it, right? I think gender's like that. It was there and we found it. And sexuality was like that, and race is like that, and empire and colonialism have been like that. Those are the things that were out there, and we brought them into view, and we analyzed them and figured out how they work. That to me is not different from what scientists claim to do. So the language of discovery, I don't think we should see that to the scientists. And there's some language in the Harvard report about we do recovery. The humanists do recovery, and scientists do discovery. I'm like, I don't think so. That's not the way I see it at all. So that's my take on interdisciplinarity, that I just think and it also refers to our uncertainty and discomfort with that, with interdisciplinarity, our fearfulness that, everybody's going to be interdisciplinary, so nobody's going to be disciplined. I think that's also an anxiety really that's linked to the incredible flux that we have produced for ourselves precisely because we're living out the unfolding of these methodologies and these insights these very powerful intellectual engines that have been created in the last 30 or 40 years. And that's destabilized everything, and interdisciplinarity is sort of our name for that, just the way we have it, like to hold the thing down somehow while we unfold it, and we can't fix that. It's gotta find its way, so indeed, it feels like shifting ground because it is. That's my take on it.
Yeah, in fact, I would say that the problem is that we're trying to do interdisciplinarity from within departmental constructs that hark back to the 19th century. And the fact is that we know that the work that we do is very, very different, yet we allow that work to occur in an environment which is structurally linked to the beginning of our disciplines in the middle and late 19th century. But I wanted to go back perhaps a little more on point to the two reports, the Commission on the Humanities and the Social Sciences, and also the Harvard report, to point to something that gives me a little bit of alarm. Because, for instance, the Heart of the Matter, which is the actual name of the study sponsored by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, defines the humanities, and I'm quoting, as a source of national memory and civic vigor, cultural understanding and communication, individual fulfillment, and the ideals we hold in common. Russell Berman, a former president of the MLA, gave a very measured summary of the Harvard report, which he titled Humanist Heal Thyself, which is very much a definition of one of the strands in the Harvard report, in which he says, and I'm quoting Berman, the report asserts with all due caution that the disproportionate visibility of the critical and suspicious strand of the humanities, with its exclusive focus on culture's complicity in domination, has contributed to the decline in student interest. And we've heard this many times. And Berman quotes the report where it goes on to make the following startling to him recognition. He says, the report, those of us committed to criticism as critique might recognize a kernel of truth in conservative fears about the left-leaning academy. Among the ways we sometimes alienate students from the humanities is the impression they get that some ideas are unspeakable in our classrooms. So you put together both of these quotations or these trends, what surfaces is an imperative to argue that the humanities must be the guardians of knowledge, the preservers of tradition, that we should retreat from the critical component of the humanities, and you can find this in several aspects in the several moments in both of these reports, that we should retreat from the critical component of the humanities, embrace teaching rather than research, eschew theory, and make humanistic language transparent and accessible, which is, of course, based on the idea that the humanities should be accessible, while science can live and cultivate exclusivity and arcaneness, because of the fact that the humanities should be accessible to everybody. Being a humanist means writing discourse that should be understood by everybody from any walk of life, right? And of course, when you stop for a second, you realize that this is a requirement of transparency and accessibility that is not imposed on any other component of the modern university, right? We are not allowed to have specialization. We're not allowed to have our language, our rhetoric, and so forth. In fact, that's not the way we should be arguing for a future for the humanities or arguing for what we should do to get out of the crisis of the humanities. I would actually argue the exact reverse. The humanities are valuable, and in this I agree with my colleague, because they do the absolute opposite. They challenge received ideas, they undermine the doxa, they create complexity where there's simplicity, and unmask ideological expediency where there is supposedly common sense. This mode of thinking and operating is, in fact, what the sciences and the humanities share in common, as opposed to what distinguishes them, and the only way in which they will be able to coexist in mutual respect. I found recently, and I hope a number of you have read it, an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education by an emeritus professor of history from Berkeley, who says exactly what I would like to transmit to you in a very pithy formulation. He says the following. His name is David Hollinger. The academic humanities and social sciences in the United States have long constituted a major apparatus for bringing evidence and reasoning to domains where the rules of evidence are strongly contested and the power of reason often doubted. These domains, on the periphery of an increasingly natural science-centered academic enterprise, embrace the messy, risk-intensive issues left aside by the methodological, narrower, largely quantitative rigor displaying disciplines. The human sciences are at the borderlands between Wissenschaft and opinion, between scholarship and ideology. Here, in the borderlands, the demographic and cognitive boundaries of the entire academic enterprise have been the least certain. Here, it is the greater challenge to act on the great Kantian imperative to dare to know, to have the courage to actually use one's understanding instead of running from all that messiness back to the less risky inquiries. In these borderlands, the human sciences have managed in the last half-century, sometimes through what were called studies programs, Black studies, women's studies, Latino studies, gay, lesbian studies, and so forth, not only to incorporate members of historically disadvantaged demographic groups at a faster rate than the STEM fields, but also to confront epistemic challenges attendant upon the cultural diversification of the United States. End of quotation. My contention, in fact, is very simple. We have to embrace fully the letter of the theoretical law that the humanities contributed to knowledge during their heyday, that the world is a text, or the world is an image, or both, that history is not the past, but the stories that we tell about the past, to take everything as a text, to affirm that there is no truth except that which is crafted and projected through language, that there are only the stories that we tell about the truth, even in the sciences, and to assert further that the critical reading and genealogical comprehension of those stories is the essence of the humanities. This kind of analysis requires skills that are independent of content or subject matter, and as such is totally transportable across disciplines and across subjects. Without the humanities, we would not understand how knowledge is produced or what forces compel us to shape our inquiries, or who we are, because who we are is the sum of our contingent narratives about ourselves, our groups, and the world. The professional disciplines have evolved from hermeneutic certainty and even hubris to an acute awareness of the contingency of the statements that they make about the world. Narrative medicine, the abandonment of the rational agent assumption in economics, the role of ignorance in science, all of them point to that. We all know that the humanities thrive in this side of that transformation, yet at the precise time at which what we have to offer has been recognized as valuable by our valued universities' neighbors, we have shied away from making a claim to its being our product, fearful that the inevitable accusations of relativism and constructivism will erode our authority. The humanities will be recognized as a worthy interlocutor by those disciplines only if they can eschew their claim to being wedded to a particular content or to the disciplinary boundaries of the 19th century, and lay claim to being the purveyors of an analytical modality that those professional disciplines have incorporated as a way of making themselves stronger, not weaker. This is perhaps the only bold move that will capture the attention of the other disciplines and restore our relevance and engagement with the world in which we live and work. Let's own up to the fact that theory and a certain type of interrogation of reality grew out of the humanities, and lay claim to that as opposed to move away from it.
Thank you, Carlos. So, I mean, I think we've heard some very important defenses of the humanities in terms of their resistance to assumed transparencies that are far from being transparent, and their resistance to the corporatization of America, the corporatization of the university. Let's pursue a few more kind of more focused questions that come out of the reports and the more general climate that you're all speaking to. One, for me in particular, I was very struck in reading the reports, of course, by the language that you're describing, but also by the question of the place of the foreign languages, because both of the reports refer frequently to the importance of the foreign languages as, to the humanities as critical fields, and yet make very few recommendations about pedagogy, about curricular enhancement, about how to integrate foreign languages into interdisciplinary programs. The American Academy, Humanities Commission report, The Heart of the Matter, that Carlos was just speaking about, presents a diagram that shows that 50% of study of foreign languages is allocated to Spanish, 37% to what they call other languages, and 13% to what are referred to as critical languages. And the report bemoans the fact that not enough attention is devoted to the teaching and learning of these languages of critical importance, and obviously we all understand which languages those are and why they're deemed to be critical. So I'd like to ask all of the panelists about this question of the status of the foreign languages now and going forward in the future within the humanities and social sciences. Maybe Mary Louise, you'd like to perhaps start on this?
Sure, because this was an issue that I focused on in my work in the MLA as well for quite a long time.
Where's the mic?
Oh, Mike, sorry. And I know in the questions that we were sent, the one on foreign languages said, are we contemplating a future in which perceived national security interests determine which languages are taught and how? And that's not the future, that's the present. It's very interesting. There is really in the American university system now, our higher education, there's a kind of parallel universe situation in which if you're wearing your MLA hat, you are lamenting. Here's a little image. Here's the thing in a nutshell. The same year that the modern language department was shut down at Roosevelt University in Chicago, another university in the United States began for the first time offering foreign language majors. It was the Naval Academy. So what's happening is that on the one hand, we have this sense of crisis in the traditionally taught languages of the humanities, the MLA's languages, French, Spanish, German, Russian, Italian, Portuguese, and meanwhile, and so we have this sense of loss there, and at the same time, there's a whole lot of incredibly happy, excited people in what's called the National Language Flagship Program, which is operating in a couple dozen American universities. It is part of what's called the National Security Education Program, which was founded in 1991 after Desert Storm and really took off after 9/11. And right now, that education program has developed a form of language teaching and language instruction that is very precise, very specific, and that they are very excited about. And what it involves is students take they sign up for a particular major in a university, and they are given scholarship money by the flagship program to participate in intensive language study that is extremely well done, extremely effective, producing what is intended to be professional levels of competence at the end of a 4-year degree. These include internships abroad, tutoring, small classes, summer intensive support. It's a very big public investment in producing something that language majors don't produce. And a typical foreign language major in an American university, first of all, doesn't often give much of a damn about what actual level of competence in the language a student achieves. In my own department at NYU, which is my favorite department on the whole planet, there's no assessment of what a Spanish major graduating can actually do with the language. And in fact, if you're in the Latin American Studies track, you can take all your courses in English. So you can have, and it's the same with French, Italian, that typically when students are assessed coming out of our language majors, they have what on the ACTFL scale of competence proficiency is what's called an intermediate 2, which means you're very, very far from being able to actually perform in any kind of professional way in the language. So the government, for a long time, in the Cold War, there was kind of an alliance between the Education Department and the Defense Department, and the Defense Department turned the NDEA funding to education, and they were trying to work together, and that all has come apart. And now what you have is a situation in which, in the United States, the Department of Education is devoted, all its resources around language are entirely devoted to eradicating languages other than English in students and getting English language learners up to grade in English. And I just heard this from a Department of Ed person a few months ago. Alongside that, they have a commitment to getting kids who speak substandard varieties of English up to snuff. So there's a whole agenda there about English and English as a class stratified thing as well as an immigrant stratified thing. So education, the Education Department is entirely about that. Several of its programs, the biggest programs devoted to foreign languages, the FLAP program, which is the one big, one of the main supports for high school foreign language assistance program, is gone. Title VI was cut by 40%. That money didn't evaporate. It moved over to the Pentagon, as did almost all the personnel working in the Department of Education on foreign language stuff. They're now in defense, not because they are committed to national security paradigms, but because that's where the action is, that's where the money is, that's where the thinking is, and that's where the results are. And these programs, it's very interesting because they're, as language instruction, they're really good. And they combine a major, whatever the major is, with this language training. And so you come out with this real, and they test themselves all the way along. The government people say, when they look at university language programs, they say, language departments, they say, you people really don't care about language instruction. You really don't think it's that competence in the language is that important. Of course, your agenda is narrowly literary in a way that's not helpful to us and not interesting to the full range of students. And you don't work on the critical languages. The flagship program works only on 8 or 10 critical languages, which are defined as geopolitically critical languages, right? And the program is absolutely designed as a pipeline system into government agencies and in particular security agencies. that's its aim. And the students are selected with that in mind, with government service in mind. The program up until last year, I don't know if it's still true, had a government service requirement attached to it, that for every year of support you got, you had to work for the government. Just to give you the idea about where and how this is happening, there are 26 flagship programs, flagship centers and programs. Arabic is at Michigan State, Michigan, Arizona, Maryland, Oklahoma, and UT Austin. These are all public universities. Chinese, they have a flagship program at Arizona State, Brigham Young, Georgia Tech, Hunter, Indiana, North Georgia State, San Francisco State, Mississippi, Oregon, Rhode Island, Kentucky. Hindi Urdu is at Texas, Austin. Korean is at Hawaii. Persian is at Maryland. Portuguese is at Georgia. Russian is at Bryn Mawr in Portland State, and UCLA and Madison. Wisconsin, Madison. Swahili is and Turkish are at Indiana. This program has also started a set of K through 12 programs, dual immersion programs in Portland, in Chinese, in Mandarin. So what you have that's really something to deal with or something to think about. You've got a program running out of a national security education program that is training kindergarten kids to start Mandarin and make their way through, and those kids will pipe into the high school program and the same thing, so that when they get to university, they have a high level of competence and they can be pipelined in the university through the flagship program and into whatever government agency needs them. So the government agencies, driven by the panic around security, have created their own language pipeline, which makes me crazy because the one thing we talked about when I was president of the MLA was that we need a language pipeline. That was our image. We need a pipeline from schools into our language programs. We don't have it, and we don't have enough people who care about it. Who really, we have this two-tiered language department business that we keep critiquing, where the people at the top aren't committed to it. So anyway, that's the scene that I look at from where I stand.
I can understand completely that there are state inflections on this issue, but the fact is that our students, even without those kinds of enticements, let's say, are voting with their feet, right? In other words, the only language, the only modern language that I guess has had either a rise in its enrollments or has managed to maintain its enrollments intact has been Spanish. Not necessarily because of the kind of considerations Mary Louise was referring to, but because of the fact that students are using a certain calculus when they decide which language they're going to study, and for them there is a calculation of professional advancement or credentialing that comes with the learning of Spanish. It doesn't come with the learning of other languages. So the other component that has to be addressed, I guess, and this is just a sliver of the reality that would need to be understood, is that there was a time that you could, when you could convince yourself, or you could hear arguments around you that sounded convincing about the fact that you could not be an educated person, you could not be a whole person if you did not master another language or if you didn't study another language. Obviously, that consideration, the study of the language, or the study of anything else for that matter, for its own self, is a consideration that no longer holds sway, right? In other words, we see our students making a kind of calculation of the kind that I mentioned about language, about everything. Their majors, the fact that they don't have one major, they have a double major, they have a triple major, 2 majors are in concentration because they need to squeeze the most out of the credentialing of their major or concentration in college. This is not just happening at Columbia. This is a systemic thing. But what we need to figure out is, what are those forces? What is the circumstance that we're talking about? And it could very well be, in fact, I don't even think it's a question of, it very well could be. It is related to the commodification of everything, and to the fact that we live in a certain moment in the development of world capitalism that has implications for everything we do. Whether we can address that in a study or in a panel it's probably funny that we should even think of it in those terms. But the fact is that until and unless we understand what are the forces that we are confronting and raise to a level where we have a sense of why is it that things have changed, and in fact things have changed so quickly that we haven't even had a chance to adjust to this new logic that is around us, we won't be able to make any dent in the problem, if there is such a thing as making a dent on something that is as universal as the phenomenon that I think we're facing.
But I'm wondering, can I just respond to that briefly? I mean, there are some things that are in our control. All universities, major universities now want to be global universities. How much is language part of a vision of global education? I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it as fundamental. I think that global education means globalization, and globalization means English. And I'm seeing global programs being built, the committees on global thought being formed, global centers being built by Columbia University in several parts of the world, one on each continent. I'm not seeing language as being fundamental to global education. I'm really puzzled by what I see as a profound paradox, which is that on the one hand, language programs are being cut and language departments are being cut, and on the other hand, we're building the global university. And I'm just not understanding how these things go together. So I think until we really articulate a vision of what global education is, in which language is absolutely fundamental, and I'm sure everybody in this room understands why it's fundamental, I don't think that, I mean, these are things that are in our control, unlike some of the things you name, which obviously aren't. So I don't think we need to leave it to students to vote with their feet. I think we need to explain to students and create a curriculum that will, in which they will understand that global citizenship, I mean, I think they know that global citizenship is important, but we need to articulate why global citizenship means that you have to know languages.
But just a point of fact, I mean, Columbia students are learning a lot of languages, a very broad array of languages, and it's actually not 50% Spanish. I mean, there's Spanish is 25-30%. There's 15% French. There's Italian. There's Chinese. I mean, there's a very wide variety, and language departments are not getting cut here. I mean, it's happening in other institutions, but for now, language teaching is doing fine.
Well, enrollments in Arabic and Mandarin across the country have just skyrocketed, which is a good thing.
And can I react to your comment about the American flag on the report of the? So you said that because the American flag is on that report, you should not read it. And of course, when we are academics, we're trying to be suspicious, and when we see people wrapping themselves in the flag, we say, hey, well, this is really disgusting. However,
that wasn't
no, but this is a shit. I have the same gut feeling, of course, but But I want to relate this to the other comment you made about technology and where it leads us, and the fact that ultimately it is a political decision. Well, political decision means civic engagement, and that's the point of relating the humanities to civic to civic engagement, what it means to participate in political discussion, and we are citizens. So I think talking about issues of common concern, issues of community and nation is actually relevant, because that's where the political debate is happening. That's where the actual political decisions are taking place.
Well, I think part of it is, as a Latin Americanist, and Carlos will, when I see who will lead America's future, even that use of America to talk about the United States is just ignorant. It's imperial and it's ignorant. It's the patriotic part, not the civic discussion part, I agree, but it also is a nationalist thing that I think we need to go beyond. But I know what you said.
There are a lot of subjects for debate. Before we open it up, I really want to touch quickly on two things, turning back a little bit to the MLA and the work of the MLA. One is the fact that under the presidency of Marianne Hirsch, the intellectual map of the MLA is being revised. A draft proposal has been circulated that rethinks our membership in divisions and discussion groups. So even if there's no crisis to respond to, why now? What are the objectives of this revision? So I'd like to ask you to speak to that, Marianne. And the other aspect of the current work of the MLA is the task force on graduate education that I know Carlos has been part of. I mean, I know that there are a number of graduate students in the room that they are concerned about their future in the humanities. So I'd like to ask about what the issues are, what the recommendations are, if you could give us some sense of that project.
So for those of you who haven't recently looked, one of the ways the MLA organizes itself is by subfields, and those subfields have been divisions, discussion groups, and also allied organizations. They organize the MLA convention, which is a very large convention. It's a very large membership of 28,000 or more members. The convention is attended by around 8,000 people. It has about 800 sessions. How do we organize? Not a mathematician. So how do we organize ourselves into subfields? Well, if you look at the list of subfields, or the map of subfields, it actually does not quite reflect the work that members do. Like the names of our departments and sometimes the makeup of our departments, which have been formed many, many years ago and are not often revised, those subfields also have not evolved as quickly and as radically as the work of the membership has evolved. So the subfields are national literatures, their periods, their genres. The periods are centuries. And those were last revised in 1974, so several generations of scholars have grown up since 1974. To those, a number of interdisciplinary fields have been added. And some of the ones Mary mentioned, women and gender studies, race studies, etc. But the whole thing has not been reconceived. So looking at it, you, I believe, have a skewed view of the profession. One could just keep adding new ones, and that would be one thing to do. It would be the simple thing to do. But I think if you even look at how they look on a page, you see certain values that the map represents. And those values, I don't think, are values that MLA members hold. So they're divided into English, American, French, German, Spanish, I think and Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Latin American. Those are the main, and then there's other. And under other, we have 2 East Asian, we have 1 African, and we have 1 Arabic. Under English, we have 13 divisions. Under French, we have, maybe 5 or 6. They're all century-based. And then we have the others. Now, MLA members have come along and said, we really need more space. We need more space for Chinese. We need more space for African, we need new fields, new language areas to come in. We also need new fields to come in. So the interdisciplinary divisions have been approaches from 1974, sociological approaches to literature, psychological approaches to literature. I don't think we work in particular that way anymore. Those names don't help us conceive of our interdisciplinary work. The comparative divisions, before 1974, and this is actually a really interesting example, between 1920 and 1974, which were the last times this was revised, the comparative divisions were Anglo-French, Franco-German, German, Anglo-German, and Slavic and Western European, and Oriental Western. Those were the comparative division. So our brave colleagues in 1974 probably looked at this and said, this is just not a good way to do it. Let's just make them centuries. So we have now comparative studies in medieval, comparative studies in the Renaissance, comparative studies in 18th century. So that's what they are now. Now, even those, what do we mean by those centuries? What areas of the world do they cover? Do they cover the world that we're actually studying? So we thought, well, maybe we could add some geographical areas to the comparative dimensions. We could have Atlantic studies or Mediterranean studies or Indian Ocean studies, and not necessarily take the centuries away, but acknowledge that the particular way of conceiving of periodization is deeply Eurocentric. So there's a slight kind of shift going on. There's a proposal up. The proposal is up for discussion on the MLA Commons, which is our new digital platform. It's met with quite a bit of encouragement, but also quite a bit of resistance, let's say, because we asked some divisions whether they might consider consolidating to make space for others, and nobody's really willing to give anything up, but they all think it's a really good idea to add new things. So that's sort of where we are, but I think it really has to do with two things. One is just creating more space at the table for new fields, and how do you do that without also deeply respecting traditional fields and protecting small fields? I mean, that's really important. Protecting the deep study of history and language, which is really important. We're not interested in a presentist map. So how do you do that? And also, how do you acknowledge change and make space for change in a process that's genuinely a collaborative process? So part of this challenge has been to come up with that process. But to me, the fundamental reason to do this was so that we could sit down and discuss with each other what our fields are and why we're approaching our work the way we're approaching it. Because if you have a century and a genre and a national literature, we kind of assume we know what that is. We think we know what 17th century French literature is. We don't have to explain it. But the way we've studied 17th century French literature in 1974 now is very different, but we're calling it the same thing. So why not look at how we might want to conceive it now?
So about interdisciplinarity, I'd like to make just one observation. For all practical purposes, the humanities are one field, and here's what I mean by that. And I speak from experience. You know, as Dean of Humanities, I get to read the work of everybody who is being hired in the humanities at Columbia. I can do that. I can read the work of any finalist for any job in the humanities and understand it, make sense of it, form my own opinion about it. My colleague in the sciences would not dream of even trying that. And even within a particular department, you know, in mathematics, you don't understand what the next person is doing. You just don't. Okay. So there is a huge difference, so within the humanities there are of course differences in discipline and approach and techniques, but by and large it is one very large area in which people can talk, in which you can read other people's work and profit from it and benefit from it. It is immensely harder to do it in the sciences. So there is a fundamental difference there.
Carlos?
Yeah, before I say anything about the work of the task force, which I actually will not be able to say much of because the work of the committee is supposed to be first presented to the Executive Council of the MLA before it can be given dissemination. I really think that in an event like this, we need to stop for a second and mention the amazing work that Rosemary Geisler-Feal has been doing as Executive Director of the MLA. I've been a member of the MLA since I was in graduate school, I think, or just like everybody else, I became a member when I went out to look for a job. And before Rosemary took over the helm of the association, it was mostly a reactive organization, one that simply felt like it was being taken by surprise all the time by events and by developments. And the MLA, under her leadership, has become much more supple and much more organic association in terms of its understanding of the issues of the profession, but also the issues of the constituents of the profession. And it's something that I think has to be said and should be said in an event like this.
Since Rosemary is here, maybe this is a cue for applause, I think.
Yeah. So while one could potentially have a discussion about whether there is a crisis in numbers or majors or enrollments and so forth, depending on where you begin to count, I don't think that there is any discussion about the fact that there is a crisis in employment. In other words, the student going out now to look for a job in one of the fields of the represented in the modern and the MLA will encounter not just a very dismal situation, but one that is made even more dismal by the fact that we have 3 or 4 cohorts bumping against each other because they have not been able to secure employment. And we can sit here till the cows come home to study why this has happened, and perhaps in the largest of all possible senses, you could argue that the defunding of higher education in the U.S. has made it very has made it peremptory for universities to make decisions, economic decisions, hiring decisions based on economic considerations, meaning that the tenure track positions that were there at some point have slowly been converted into term positions or part-time positions. And there was a time when we could have lulled ourselves into thinking that if there were positions out there, Columbia students would get them. Or if not just Columbia, Harvard, and Yale, and maybe Princeton would be able to get them. NYU. It doesn't matter. The point is that we lulled ourselves into thinking that this was something that was affecting other people, not us. But the reality is that, as you very well know, if you are even thinking or contemplating the idea of being a candidate, that it is not a guarantee. There is no guarantee that there will be a job waiting for you when you go out. So the crux of the work of the task force has been to gather a great deal of information and put it all together to make sense of why there is a crisis and what are the elements of the crisis, but also to make recommendations to departments, to deans, to graduate students themselves about what are the strategies that should be contemplated in the context of the crisis in employment that we're facing right now. I don't think I'm betraying anything by telling you that the issue of alternatives to academic careers is something that is a very important component of what the task force is contemplating. What are those options? How to identify them, but also how to change the culture in academic departments that makes it difficult for students to even talk about the fact that they're thinking about not having an academic career, or having somebody in the department that will advise them when they're not thinking of pursuing such an academic career. I believe that the report should be advanced to the Executive Council sometime in the early spring of 2014, and ideally should be coming out at some point soon after that.
Thank you. Well, there are a lot of issues that we didn't get to touch on yet, but maybe they will come up in the discussion. So I'd like to invite questions and comments to continue, the conversation that we've begun. A little louder, or maybe stand up, please.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you for really setting up the questions that need to be discussed, and even if not all the answers are there. As a member of the commission, of the American Academy's commission, I take your comments in stride. They're quite well founded, and let me just say that it could have been much worse. No
doubt about it.
You can imagine we've got 53 people of that sort, and it's, it's steering a ship. The language that eventually prevails is language that everybody can understand. And it was hard to get some of the points in that were there that you assume should. But I have two questions. One has to do with the language issue, and the other has to do with graduate education. On the language, small language, they're now European languages, right? In most large universities, the enrollment pressures or the fall, the drops in enrollment have been in European languages.
Yeah.
And Miriam, you talked about how the MLA is rethinking its divisions, its adherence to national century rubrics. And Carlos, you talked about, raising the question. You raised the question of the departmental structure of the American university. And I wondered if there's, is a solution to the language problem something to do that would involve bringing those two observations together, or does that in fact put the language instruction itself at risk? I think that's a question people are asking. And then second, about graduate education, I think you know that ACLS has a program of public fellows funded by the Mellon Foundation that has for now 3 or 4 years tried to validate the choice of going into a non-academic career with a PhD in the humanities. I wonder, even if you could get departments to wrap their heads around this possibility and to embrace it as a positive outcome degree, would you need to change how the degree itself is structured, or does it work the way? Does it actually work the way most of them are structured?
Yeah. To answer your last question, the challenge, in fact, is going to be precisely that: how to get departments that are organized around the categories that Marianne was talking about and that the MLA is trying to change, to not replicate themselves, right? In other words, we all know that the university is the institution where the is a place where the institution of the university replicates itself. But we have to find a way to, while allowing that replication to take place, to have it occur in a different fashion. And it's definitely the case that the kind of courses that would need to be taught, the kind of students that you would need to allow into your program would change dramatically. There are people right now who are applying to graduate school who don't fit a profile if you think of the only thing students can do with their degree is an academic career, right? They have a statement of purpose that we can't make sense of because it doesn't already have the profile that you're looking for and so forth. If we continue to do that, if we continue to just selectively allow certain types of students into our graduate programs, pretty soon the pipeline is going to dry up. It's going to become clear that we are only interested in admitting students who want to pursue an academic career, when the fact is that there aren't academic jobs at the other end. So how long is it going to take before the law of supply and demand makes that pipeline dry? And in a sense, if we don't change what we expect of our students and what we expect our students' careers to be, we will be out of business ourselves. In other words, we have to diversify our student cohorts, but also what we expect our students to do with the degree.
On languages, 60 different languages are being taught at Columbia. Now, some of these languages, a small number of these languages had been supported by government funds, and that money went away in whole or in part. So the short-term survival of some of those languages was in question. However, long-term, I'm not really worried. First of all, there is a strong institutional commitment to offering a large array of languages for all kinds of intellectual, curricular, practical reasons. Also, technology helps. And here I want to mention a project that the Mellon Foundation supported. And also want to salute the Mellon Foundation, which has played a major, behind-the-scenes role in supporting the humanities. So it's a very simple idea. Through video conferencing, you can get students from 2 or 3 different universities in a language that has few students, and have them taught by one instructor in a particular school. And there are 3 students here, 3 students there, and 3 students in the third place. And then you have a language classroom. And in this way, you can offer languages that were difficult to offer for economic reasons, and you can offer more advanced levels of existing languages. And here it's just a question of reaping the benefits of technology.
Yeah, I think that it's important to mention that, and also to it's really dramatic that all of us are at private elite universities, and the kind of apocalyptic scenarios in languages are happening at public colleges, universities, state colleges, community colleges, where we've seen these rolling shutdowns of just shutdowns of modern languages in many places, in quite a number of schools, and just a pulling of 100% disinvestment. And it's really interesting because those institutions tend to be the places where the first and second generation immigrant students are entering it with language abilities that could be built on if there was a pipeline to invest in those students, right? And so the gorgeous situation you have here, which is, one absolutely fantastic, is going to be is contrast with more general question, and that's it's one place where the public-private divide is pretty dramatic.
Well, just to add to that, your question reminded me of a moment at a meeting at the American Comparative Literature Association where we had the chairs of some of the departments that had been cut speak about, SUNY Albany, French department, and so on. And one comment really got to me, and that was the comment that no other field but languages and literature atomizes itself to the degree that we do. So history would never have a department of African history and a department of European history and a department of Latin American history. They are one department. Languages and literature have become very, small departments that then become weak in certain institutional settings. And if there are institutions that don't have the kind of commitment that Columbia has, then they become easier to cut because they're small. So I think that's one thing to consider. And to build on that, one of the things that I've learned as president of MLA is how many different kinds of institutions we have. So when I've gone to the meetings of chairs of departments of English or departments of foreign languages, I've seen the very, very different kinds of employment needs that different universities have. So it relates to some of this divisional organization. So we educate our graduate students to be specialists in very particular fields and to have a depth of knowledge of those fields. Those kinds of students, those are the needs of research universities, of our small elite colleges. Two-year colleges, community colleges, state universities need generalists. They need generalists, and they need the students who are trained interdisciplinarily. So beyond sort of going to the alternate career pathway, we also really need to think about just structuring the graduate degree in a somewhat different way in order to meet those needs. And I've noticed, for example, in this year's job list and the last few years, how many things are added to the particular field. So somebody will need a kind of 19th century French specialist, but also, then add to that animal studies, medical humanities, and digital humanities, or any kind of array of other things. So those things we need to take very seriously because the needs really are very different.
Can
I just want to, before we move to another question, I just want to thank Pauline Yu for the question, for the work of the ACLS, and just say with regard to the Humanities Commission, since we said some critical things, that one of the strong recommendations of the report is increased public funding in the humanities, and that I think we agree on. So, questions? Kathy.
To what Marianne said, and that's the importance of connecting language and literature instruction and preparation of graduate students to go out and devote all kinds of teaching. And in places that's necessary and accepted, it's not usually prepared for in practice.
Yeah. Could I answer? The reason why you can't have in history a department of African history and Australian history and so on, and you do have it in our languages, is the fact that again, it all goes back to some 19th century philological idea of the fact that you cannot have in one department the English, people who are studying the English cultural phenomenon and the phenomena, let's say, and Spanish. Because that's like mixing oil and water, right? But that is precisely why we continue to produce students that handle only one literary tradition, that are formed to know only one, and have them think that that's perfectly fine. I think that comparative literature in its many acceptations is perhaps a model that we need to start institutionalizing and in order to break out of the philological box in which we still live, all of us in departments of modern languages.
Yes, sorry. My name is and I was very interested. I have been following the redefinition of the fields, the discussion in the MLA, and also the comments you have been doing about languages, about areas, about the whole redefinition of what we do, as a matter of fact, in the different departments of languages. And I think it is very interesting, for instance, what is going on in some departments, and I would perhaps mention Latin American language and cultures as one of them, because it is something and that reflects as well in the MLA discussion about the fields, is how the dominant foreign language has all but disappeared, insofar as it has been subsumed in other fields like Iberian, that also gives birth to other languages at the same time. Iberian also comprises Portuguese, now also comprises Galician, also comprises Catalan, etc., etc. So it's interesting how there are some areas that are doing what you were also claiming that we should be doing, that is to actually make understand how important it is to learn other languages or to teach other languages, but we are doing it from within the departments. But at the same time, I am seeing this resistance of other traditional fields to do something similar, because we don't have Spanish anymore in that discussion. There is no such thing as Spanish in the whole list, but there is French, Italian, Hebrew, Arabic, etc., etc. So I would say this is perhaps the only one that has disappeared as a language in itself, and it has been subsumed in English, Latino studies, etc., etc., in Iberian, which I am totally fine with, by the way, and Latin America.
You should post on the comments.
Yes, over here.
I teach at Rutgers University in Newark, and for 16 years we've been the most diverse campus in the United States. And we have a lot of those students who come in with really rich language skills. But usually what happens is after they've gone to the public schools, they have to take basic Spanish once they get to the university. So there's an incredible loss of resources in the process of having no pipeline. So I'm so glad you brought that up. And my question, I was really intrigued by this discussion of military language training, and I was wondering, because I actually have a student from the Naval Academy in my graduate seminar right now, if in the context of that training they include literature and intellectual traditions. That was one of my questions. And then I was also, just intrigued because we also have a public humanities graduate program, sort of a program in American Studies where we train people to sort of do things in addition to the academy. But we're very much sort of searching for models and people to talk to. So I just want to end by thanking you for organizing this meeting.
Mary Louise, do you want to speak to that question of the military training?
Is there a cultural component to a literary component to, this is so interesting. First of all, every recruit into the American military is tested for language aptitude. Not only for languages they know, but also for their ability to learn languages. And if they demonstrate ability and aptitude and motivation, they're offered the opportunity to head to defense language schools or wherever, right? So we could do that, yes, it's so interesting. Right when we were doing this remapping of the MLA's divisions, I went to DC, this was like last fall, to hear a presentation from the Marines about their new Advanced Operational Cultural Learning Program. And the Marines divided the globe into 17 regions, and there's big units of men or Marines that are 2,200 people. Is that a brigade? division. Every division of the Marines, which is 2,200 Marines, has several people in it who've been trained in cultural expertise in all 17 areas. So every brigade or every division can be, wherever it is sent on the planet, it has a number of people who've had the training for that particular region. Now the training, they agreed, was incredibly inadequate. It was like 40 hours or something, and it was a very minimal thing that was like, this is the geography of the place, this is how you find the map. But they had, and I laughed because here we were in the MLA also trying to get the geography and have all the, we were converting, as you said, from languages as our, to geography as our basic framing. And so anyway, these two things went together in a very peculiar way. But yes, they do, but their idea of culture is the Marines had they had belief systems, they had 5 categories: physical environment, but culture was more like belief systems. And that was the way they were imagining it. And that was then religiosity and so on. So the things you would, they had 5, under these rubrics of the training, there were 5 different areas, and I've got many numbers over here. But so cultural, yes, there was definitely literary instruction, literature is taught at the military academies for sure, but it's taught in the context of a larger, more instrumentalized idea of culture as belief.
Hi, I'm Econ. I actually marched with my feet from the social sciences to the humanities a long time ago. When I started at Columbia, I was an urban studies major, and now I'm doing my PhD in French at NYU. And I feel like we can't end this discussion tonight without referring to the man on top of that poster there, Adam Gottlieb. He recently, that's Adam Gottlieb, right? He recently wrote a piece, he's a New Yorker writer, but he recently wrote a piece for their website that didn't appear in the magazine about teaching why teacher why study English. And he ended with something that seems so simple, but that is so profound, with that, you know, we need to study the humanities because we are human. And I don't think there's anything wrong with going back to that idea. And Professor Forrest, you mentioned in the first round of commentary that yes, there is this sort of this inferiority complex in the humanities, which, you know, when we're as graduate students now thinking of applying to humanities postdocs, we're told that, especially in French, we should be aware of this inferiority complex. And then later you mentioned that, you know, as a dean, the math dean or mathematics professor would have a hard time reading a piece of humanities scholarship. I think if I understood you.
No, they could not understand a piece of humanity. Well, I mean, they would think they understand it, but they will not understand. They cannot understand what's being done in other fields in the sciences, and even within math, you don't understand what's being done in an adjacent field.
Okay, so my point was simply that I misunderstood, but I thought it should be the mathematics professor should always understand the humanities because he is human also, and we should just never forget that.
No, but I think no, but it's true up to a point. That is actually I think, Carlos, you in a sense you made my point about the desire of the humanities to be seen or to be respected like the sciences or to act like the sciences, and this is something I think I disagree on this. I think it's not the same model, and that the humanities have a more organic connection to natural language and then civic life that may not be as learned and formal as it takes place in in academia. So I think there is a continuum that should be acknowledged and respected.
I'm just wondering, is there anything wrong with asking scientists also to be transparent or understandable? For example, one of my colleagues who sat on a 3-year panel an interdisciplinary panel for grants, and found that the humanities proposals got a much greater scrutiny because everybody thinks they should be able to understand the proposal, whereas, so the scientists would mark them down because they thought they understood what was going on, but the humanists would not dare mark down a science proposal if they didn't understand it because the same level of communication was not demanded of the scientists. I do think that we can require, I mean, this is not, maybe not the place to go into a debate about this, but I do think that we're granting science with a kind of mystery that we're not, there are very different standards being applied.
But our vulnerability is precisely the reason why we matter.
I guess I wasn't talking about an inherent vulnerability.
No. But the fact that humanist discourse can be challenged and can be understood by a broad range of people.
But I agree with what you're saying, Pierre, up to a certain extent. That I may not understand exactly what is being said in a scientific treatise, but that doesn't mean I cannot subject that discourse and that text to, for instance, an ideological analysis. This is what some people have been doing, some scientists and non-scientists, sociologists of science, historians of science, has been doing to science, showing the extent to which the kind of objective, discipline-driven knowledge that the sciences seem to be producing is subject and has been subject all along to ideological pressures, to political pressures, to kinds of interpretive maneuvers that arise not from the subject the way that we assume that science is as opposed to the humanities, but rather from the contextual, from ideological, political context.
Sure. I mean, of course, you can do sociology of science and find a lot of ideological bias in the way science is done. However, that's not how science understands itself and policies itself and functions institutionally. And so, precisely because it's defined in a different way, and it functions, so it does not lend itself to ideological critique. It just doesn't.
It doesn't lend itself. It doesn't mean you cannot engage in it.
Yeah, but it's immaterial. It will not change the way science is done.
Okay, I'm going to take more questions. Okay, over here.
Hi, my name is Meg. I'm a PhD student here at Columbia in the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society in the English department. And but I'm going to put that aside because before I came here, I was. Oh, you can't hear me.
As loud as possible.
Okay. Well, before I came here as a PhD student, I was a language instructor at Stanford. And I don't know if you're all aware of this. Stanford actually organizes its foreign languages in a language center. So that's a different way of organizing. But I also taught at UC Berkeley, so I have some comparison there about, I definitely think it was better to be in a language center as an instructor. Stanford also really took good care of us. I mean, in terms of there being benefits. So I was just hoping that you guys could maybe, for a minute or two, address that workforce, how important it is, and all the anxiety.
Address that workforce of language instructors, you mean?
Yeah, because there's been so much press lately, and we all know about the press that's been happening, I hope, because there was a French instructor who passed away from Duquesne University recently, and it just flared everything up again. But temporary sort of academic labor that is often utilized to teach the foreign languages. That would be
I mean, it's not just in foreign languages; it's ubiquitous in the university right now. I think the national statistic is about 70%, right? Is that right? Of courses in institutions of higher learning are taught by adjunct faculty, part-time contingent, part-time or full-time contingent labor. I think the working conditions are very bad and the pay is very, very low. The MLA has actually been working on this steadily for a very long time now. We have a best practices document that that makes recommendations both to departments and to part-time or contingent workers about the kinds of things that they might be able to advocate for and to expect from departments, and the kind of pay they might be able to expect, the kind of leave policies and medical policies and so on. But I think it's more of a wish list than a reality right now. So I'm really glad you're bringing this up, because I think when I was talking earlier about the context in which we should be having this discussion, this is really part of the context. Now I understand from my colleague Pierre that the situation in Colombia is somewhat different in terms of the percentage, at least in the humanities, but I think it's a really crucial question. And I think that the other thing that's happening is, as we were saying earlier, is the kind of erosion of tenure track jobs. That's the kind of steady erosion through, sometimes it's almost invisible. I mean, I know that some departments, for example, are hiring PhDs in term appointments and in tenure track jobs, and those term appointments do not turn into tenure track jobs necessarily, so that's a slow erosion of tenure. But there's, I mean, and those may be full-time positions, but they may not lead to other full-time positions, so this is a sort of a range of trends that's very, very worrisome.
I want to recommend the MLA's best practices document for contingent faculty, or whatever term you want to use. It's a terrific document, and we at NYU, when we had a discussion about this, I introduced that. We were on the Faculty of Arts and Sciences was trying to arrive at some kind of deliberation about contingent faculty, and I distributed the MLA document, and it just became the template for the conversation. It is a really, really good document. And if your situation at Stanford was as good as it was probably following. And I know I taught for almost 30 years at Stanford, and that we used the MLA document in making the, in creating the norms for those jobs in language instruction. And in other places, the conditions are nothing remotely like that. And in fact, at the panel at the Latin American Studies Association, I was at a panel on this, and the conclusion of the discussion was unionize. If you're the contingent faculty, you need to unionize, or it's in order to protect itself from all kinds of, in the most minimal ways. And a lot of people at public institutions, in particular in small schools, were just feeling, yeah, that was their best option.
Just add that if you'd like to find that document, go to the MLA website, and it's called Professional Employment Practices for Non-Tenure Track Faculty Members' Recommendations and Evaluative Questions. I just plug in the word evaluative in the search function, because I think that's the only place on our website where we might use that term, where it comes up first. So remember, evaluative, and you'll find it on the MLA website.
Yeah, I want to thank you for that question, for bringing up the question of the workforce, labor issues, very much so. And also for, I think, pointing out different structural models. You were speaking about the Stanford Language Teaching Center, where there's a kind of concentration of language teaching. We've heard about other models in which language teaching is more integrated into disciplines and interdisciplinary teaching. So it's interesting to reflect on how that plays out. There was another question over here, I think, waiting for a long time. So let's go ahead.
I just want to thank the panel and the different institutions represented here. It was very work at the end of the day.
As loud as possible.
Yes, sorry. Thank you all for the great work, especially the MLA in recent years. It's been it's one of the organizations that I think is doing having some of the toughest conversations. And there's a particular element in the room that I wanted to address, which is the sort of tough medicine that it would require to transform the departments in a way that that would fit Carlos' bill. The training of graduate students in the future in ways that does not bite them into the pit of hell of the academic market as it is today does involve certain forms of collaboration that for which the infrastructure is not there. And it's a pragmatic question. So how do we get the infrastructure there? Number one, we need to have people in the departments. We need lines in the departments for people who can teach folks digital humanities, which is, I think, the stuff that produces certain other forms of profession. One, at least, but a really important one today. We need to figure out how that work is not to be displaced to the libraries. where I'm here at the Columbia Libraries. I help run the Digital Humanities Center here, where we are taking the slack. Not only of language departments, we're taking the slack of music, of history, of doing some of that important training, but of course it's unsustainable to do it over there. And we're actually demanding of our graduate students that they double their time in order to finish their degree, in order for us to give them that training that will give them that edge. And we are placing people. It's not a panacea, but we do place some people. We give that path to the out.gov. I myself am an example of that. I have a PhD in Comp Lit, and now I'm an out. So how, in practical terms, do we make these tough decisions about lines in departments, about changing the way we relate to the library? Perhaps that involves conversations in which we give credit to the work that the library is doing in ways that we are not used to. And by the way, I just wanted to add a little comment. I'm not particularly worried about the humanities. I think we'll be okay.
You know, I think one of the things that, in a kind of instrumental way that you're referring to is, and Carlos used the word replication, and there's this. It's just astonishing to me the entrenchment of the habit we have, and I see this in myself as well. That that when somebody leaves a team, you replace them with the same thing, you know. So you lose a right winger, you replace them with a. I mean, I'm talking about hockey right now, not politics. But I mean, so you replace people. So you look, the 19th century person just, you know, leaves, and you've got to replace them with one of them. And it's, you're just describing a situation where the 19th century person leaves, and you say, okay, now what? You know, what's the thing we ought to have that's coming over the horizon? And so I think there's a lot of that can be done just quite easily by deans or by chairs to just intervene in that replication thing. You know, that the MLA job list has been a really interesting example of that, where, you know, if you're somebody who does queer studies in English, you've got to be able to market yourself as a 19th century person or a you know, a medievalist in order to fit the grid. And I think if the grid gets loosened up a little bit and that replication habit dissolves a little, then it's easy to.
I guess being in the situation I find myself in helps simply because we're constantly looking in the graduate school to ways in which precisely we can intervene and interfere in that exact replication, right? In other words, we know that performance is the way in which you replicate, but performance means also that you can intervene, because no performance is repeated exactly the same way, right? So the thing is to figure out how to be constantly making available to graduate students who are here opportunities that will naturalize certain activities, certain choices, and so forth, so that by the time they leave, they have already built into their repertoire these habits of thought, these practices, and those are the people who are going to be doing the future hiring, right? The problem that we have right now is that the people who hire are still very caught within their understanding of the profession, typically in terms of centuries and in terms of genres and so forth. And we may want to get somebody who does 19th century differently, but we still want the damn 19th century person, because we think that without that, there's a lacuna in the department, and we will never be able to make it all fit and bring the best graduate students. Well, but if graduate students are looking for other kinds of skills when they're looking for a place to go to, that will also force change, right?
Well, speaking about faculty lines, you know, when a department loses someone, there is no such thing as an automatic replacement. I mean, they have to make the case. If they want to hire someone, they have to make the case that they want to hire someone, you know, in this field or in a different field, and they may or may not be successful.
No, I understood. It's over there when we do make that argument. What kinds of arguments are we making?
That's good.
And it does depend a lot also on the kinds of things that you are willing to recognize as valuable scholarships you understand what is at stake in the reputation of your department. All of these things are yet internal to the departments, but at some point they must give. And I think Carlos is almost discourse is almost deterministic around this, as if the situation will force it. I like to help situations move along.
Okay, so we're going to take 2 more questions. Emmanuel.
A rather naive question, but just based on another number that I've not been brought up tonight, which is the place at Columbia, 1/3 of the classes are taught by non-tenure track faculty. At the place at NYU, which is leading the way in so many other ways, 2/3 of the classes are taught by people who are not in tenure track positions. And I understand that we have to think outside the box. I completely not only understand but approve the idea that we need to train our students to do other things than just reproducing the profession and be researchers for R1 universities or top research universities. But don't we have a collective responsibility in trying to keep those jobs? The 19th century person, it might be replaced. Actually, won't be replaced by a 19th century person, especially in a place like NYU. Is he or she's going to be replaced by 2 adjuncts who are going to be disposed of 2 years from now? So isn't there something that as people who are established and have positions, it doesn't preclude the idea of preparing people to different kind of positions, to prepare them to use digital humanities, but don't we have collectively a responsibility at keeping those positions? Or is this over? Do we have, I'm just wondering.
The size of the tenure track faculty at Columbia has actually increased in the past 10 years. So,
No, but this is not a trend. I was using Columbia as an exception. I think the trend is more like a place like NYU.
But I think the question that was raised earlier that relates to yours is how do we make the case to keep the positions, right? And so that's actually really important, and that's where I've learned the kind of diversity of universities. So, right now I'm battling with the people in British literature and restoration and late 18th century, because we've suggested maybe they want to be the long 18th century. Well, they're saying if you eliminate restoration, those positions will never be replaced, and we will never be able to, to make the case to our deans that we need somebody in restoration when our restoration person retires. And then people have come to me from state universities and community colleges and said, this is so great, you're arguing for more interdisciplinarity, and if I really want to make the case to my dean that we need a tenure track position in French that would also include, Francophone and be interdisciplinary, I will have a much better way to make the case if students are trained that way than if I say I need to replace the medievalist with another medievalist. That would never fly. So I think people have very different conceptions of how those, how to keep the jobs, and maybe we need to have more extended conversations about how we might make those cases, because I think you're absolutely right. That's what we have to do.
Just anecdotally, I've not seen in the departments that I'm in NYU, I have not yet seen a tenure track position converted to an adjunct position. I haven't seen that happening. I've seen a proliferation of adjunct hires. But that conversion that you're talking about, I haven't seen that. So I don't think the tenured faculty is shrinking, in other words.
Yeah, I have to say I'm a little skeptical about the call to go beyond traditional coverage. Well, just tell you how it works in practice. Well, first of all, these traditional formulas have the weight of tradition behind them and the force of habit and so on, and institutions work in this way. If you're going to come up with new subfields, there has to be agreement as to what they would be, it's not clear what they would be, and of course there are some interesting discussions, but there has to be consensus. And these things move slowly. In practice, it has not been an obstacle. That is, again, and speaking as a dean here, when the department says, we want to replace so-and-so because we need coverage in this field, you know, they know that they're going to meet a sort of skeptical response because everybody has holes in their coverage, so it's a game everyone plays and believes in it only, you know, up to a point. But in reality, everyone knows that there are many other things going into those decisions. It's the ability to, you know, to be a specialist in more than one subfield, to have theoretical approaches, to have more languages, to have broader interests. So I don't think it's working so badly.
So we're out of time, and I want to say a few thank yous first to the speakers for their participation, very insightful, passionate comments, and more generally for their service to the profession. Thank you especially to Marianne Hirsch for being president of the MLA this year, to her colleagues at the MLA who are here this evening, and thanks to everyone else for attending and participating.